we've all been worried about China doing something like this more than America. And for example, people say, well, if you allow your country to be, inundated by cheap electric vehicles, and then you upset the Chinese, you won't be able to get the upgrade, right?
Yeah.
And so that's been a concern. But now it's actually also the United States that they're concerned about with using these threats, and we're seeing with Trump's threats with tariffs that that's a real concern. So it's smart, I think, for Europe and the United Kingdom to be thinking more strategically about this issue.
Now, I don't know if you stayed up to listen and watch, but President Trump set records last night in his latest State of the Union speech. He spoke for an hour and 48 minutes.
After just 1 year, I can say with dignity and pride that we have achieved a transformation like no one has ever seen before, and a turnaround for the ages. It is indeed a turnaround for the ages.
Well, the president touched on the recent Supreme Court ruling against his flagship tariff policy.
But the good news is that almost all countries and corporations want to keep the deal that they already made, knowing that the legal power that I, as president, have to make a new deal could be far worse for them, and therefore they will continue to work along the same successful path that we had negotiated before the Supreme Court's unfortunate involvement.
Above the sound of protest from some Democrat Party members, the president doubled down on his immigration agenda.
These for public officials who block the removal of criminal aliens, in many cases drug lords, murderers all over our country. They're blocking the removal of these people out of our country, and you should be ashamed of yourself.
Right, so what's the reality of how the Trump agenda is playing in America and, of course, around the world? Let's first touch in with Tom Calver, the Times data editor. Hello to you, Tom.
Hi, John.
Hi, so there was the president trotting out some of his familiar themes. I mean, the tone of it was maybe, I suppose you've got to say comparatively restrained compared to past speeches, but the key elements were still there. What do the polls tell us about the way President Trump's agenda is playing now with the American people? Because, the numbers I've seen show him significantly losing support on major issues, including areas where he's been quite strongly supported in the past. But tell me the evidence and the data.
Yeah, that's right. So I think with Trump, the important thing to remember is he's never been universally popular from both sides. So when we basically have been averaging out loads and loads of different opinion polls over the past few years. And end of 2024, start of 25, about 49% people had a favourable opinion of him, 49% had an unfavourable opinion of him. So his net rating was round about zero. Now he has a net rating of minus 11 points. So he has become unpopular. And I think, you might counter that by saying, okay, well, it's typical for presidents to lose popularity as they get on with the sort of hard business of governing. And yes, that is true. But Trump is more unpopular, the poll suggests, than any of the previous three presidents before him. So he is uniquely unpopular. But I think what's really interesting is if we dig into the issues, because, of course, Trump came to power on a promise of inflation. Remember, he did all those set pieces where he was posing in front of eggs and other groceries. And actually, his handling of the economy and handling of inflation have been really, really hit. So he has a net approval rate on inflation of minus 28,
really?
And on the economy of minus 23. So clearly, voters are sending him a signal that they are not happy with how he has handled the cost of living.
Yeah, I think I see the price of eggs in America has actually come down, but the broader picture when it comes to affordability and prices is really much more mixed than the president suggests. And when it comes to the defining issue of tariffs, Tom, well, that has gone down in the public's estimation broadly as well, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there was a big promise with Trump. His success is always kind of seen as linked with the success of the stock market. And I think there was almost like a promise of rising wealth for everyone in America. And that hasn't panned out. I think the penny has dropped. As we sort of saw continued tariff chaos last week, that actually this tariff scheme is not making Americans richer, perhaps in the way that they thought.
All right, Tom Calver, great to get your thoughts. Thank you, Tom Calver, their data editor at The Times. And now let's take a broader perspective from Karin Von Hippel, the former State Department official in the United States who used to head up the Royal United Services Institute. Karin, good to have you with us again.
Good to be back, John. Thank you.
Karin, then, should we just pick up on the question of tariffs? Now, let's just move over, because we have discussed in the past the president, and he did again in the State of the Union address. He argues that tariffs are paid by foreign countries and foreign companies. That's just not true. But it is a fact also, isn't it, that America's trading partners are, in different ways pushing back on trade and the pressure from America, instead of giving way, as you might have seen in the earlier days.
Well, some have pushed back and they feel that they have made themselves worse off because they've agreed to concessions, and they're not entirely sure now if they really even have to, give all this money, invest all this money in the U.S. economy, like Japan and Indonesia, for example, did about a week ago. Others, like China, really played chicken with Trump and didn't agree to anything, and they're probably in a far better place. So it really depends on the country. I think everyone's a little bit nervous about declaring victory right now, because they know how volatile he is, and he's going to try to wheel out other tools for tariffs, but he will be more restricted than he has been so far.
Yeah, and when it comes to tech, there's something of a similar story. In finance, where we have the United Kingdom and Europe maybe more robustly talking about establishing their own and our own autonomous system of payments, instead of relying on American systems like Visa and MasterCard. And that's partly through fear of America just shutting down those systems at a time of coercion or aggression.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I just learned about this recently as well. 95% of British credit card transactions are made by systems owned by MasterCard and Visa. And so just as the Europeans want to have autonomy and strategic autonomy, let's just say, in defense, and build up their own security, they need to do the same thing, because, of course, if America turns it off, they're going to be left, like many Russians were when the sanctions were applied, and unable to buy anything. So it makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's interesting to me, this story, because, of course, we've all been worried about China doing something like this more than America. And for example, people say, well, if you allow your country to be, inundated by cheap electric vehicles, and then you upset the Chinese, you won't be able to get the upgrade, right? And so that's been a concern. But now it's actually also the United States that, they're concerned about with using these threats. And we're seeing with Trump's threats with tariffs that that's a real concern. So it's smart, I think, for Europe and the United Kingdom to be thinking more strategically about this issue.
And Karin, we've talked often about the other NATO members beyond the United States moving towards greater military and strategic autonomy. But I think more generally, the loss of trust in America among America's strategic partners, that carries a cost, doesn't it, from America's point of view?
Yeah, I mean, look, it's hurting the United States in the long run, because, of course, no country will ever really be able to trust U.S. commitments, because another president can come along that's just as bad or worse than Trump. That being said, I actually think it's better in the long term for the United Kingdom and European countries and others to build up their own resilient security and capabilities, so they aren't reliant on other countries, so they have more autonomy to do things that make sense for their own country. So I think in the long run, actually, countries like the United Kingdom, Canada, and others will probably say this ended up being a good thing for us.
All right. It's really great to get your thoughts, Karin, as always. Thank you. Karin Von Hippel, formerly the head of the Royal United Services Institute.